I'm Chris Farrell from the official GonnaGeek.com podcast, a proud member of the GonnaGeek network, just like the show you're listening to now. The opinions expressed are those of each individual. Check out all the other geeky podcasts over at GonnaGeekNetwork.com and get ready, because geekiness begins in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Better Podcasting, a show where we talk about podcast tips, tools, and best practices to help you succeed with your podcast. What makes us different? Well, just like you, we podcast purely out of the love and fun of it. Podcasting is our hobby, and we recognize that it's yours too. We always encourage your questions and feedback, and you can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. Here's your host for the show, Stephen John Drew and Stargate Pioneer.
Hello and welcome to episode 19 of Better Podcasting. My name is Stephen John Drew, and with me today is Stargate Pioneer.
Woohoo! I'm so excited, and I'm not excited because we're 19, because that's like a dull age. You're not 18 anymore, so you don't have those benefits, and you're not 21 yet, so you don't have those benefits, and you're not 25 in America, so you can't rent a car. So it's that awkward age. But I'm really excited because this is our first chance to simulcast on YouTube Live and Blab simultaneously. Woohoo!
That's absolutely true, and I will correct you. In Canada, 19 is the age of majority in many provinces. So that means that lots of people do get to be adults, and I'm making the drinky symbol. That's what I'm trying to do right now, because that does happen. So there you go. If you're Canadian, it is a party birthday, but don't worry, we don't do that here on the Better Podcasting podcast, do we?
No, we don't.
If you are not picking up on it, we are actually got something very, very exciting going on today. We are actually going to be live. We're recording this show live. This is the first of hopefully many where we're going to try to take some interaction, some calls from listeners / viewers. And we're shaking up the format this week, and we have somebody with us to do that. His name is Chris Farrell. You may have heard him on previous episodes. Hello, Chris.
What's up, fellas? How's it going?
It's awesome to have you here, man. Thanks for joining us.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
You guys are slumming. You got me coming back. Did all the big names not say they wanted to join you this week?
We had a long list. No, we're just kidding.
You are the big name.
Oh, okay.
Now, listener / viewer, this is something that we absolutely, like I said, we're going to be shaking it up. And what that means is that we don't have any specific topic today. We are going to be letting the show be dictated by the audience. We are going to go ahead and take some callers a little bit later. We have a few other things to touch on, but primarily it will be different. And don't worry, next week we will return with our usual format. If you did not check us out on geeks.live today, just keep an eye on our Facebook and our Twitter and our episodes, because we do like to definitely promote when we are going to do a live event. And if you are checking us out live, you might be watching us on Blab, you might be checking us out on YouTube. That's right, we are actually doing both at the same time. So there's a couple of notes with that, as we've talked about in prior episodes. Bandwidth is something that you have to consider when you podcast. And so because the bandwidth is split, you may find a little bit bumpier of a picture, but in theory, it should be mostly the usual quality post-production. So if you see any weird glitches, let us know, and we'll try to refine it for maybe a future show. And of course, SP, we want to know what the listeners think about this, right?
Absolutely. We want to hear from the listeners on how they like this experience. We want to hear anything that they want to know about hobby podcasting. I've also heard it called passion podcasting, but since we're three guys that are, into women, I don't know if we really want to be known as the passion podcasters together.
I could agree with that. I think, I don't know, SP, what do you think? Or Chris, what do you think?
I'm not sure I want to use the words passion and SP or Steven in the same sentence. I'll be honest.
That's funny. So before we do open up the seat here on the Blab streaming service, we want to go ahead and give a shout out again. If you missed it last week, we did the draw of the Audio-Technica ATR 2100-USB, and as of today, it is in the winner's hands. We know that it arrived. It is in Diami Paloki's hands, and Diami, we can't wait to get your status report and let us know what you think about the microphone.
Yes, we do. We want to hear what he thinks about the microphone, and we want to hear about how he's using it, because next weekend, while Chris and I are at C2E2 in Chicago, just a moment on that, he is going to be at a woodworking conference in Florida. So I want to know how the microphone works for him down in Florida.
That's great. That's great. And wait, but there will be an episode next week. That's crazy, but you'll be there. But you'll be here. It's confusing. It's called pre-recording. So there you go.
Yes, it won't be live.
All right. So you got anything before we open up that seat there, SP?
Oh, yeah. Let's see. There's a lot of stuff going on. Have any of you guys had issues with iTunes Connect?
I have. How about you, Chris?
Of course, it doesn't recognize some of the podcasts I've submitted before. It's good times.
Right. So I have a total of 5 podcasts that I actually produce and own, and I only have 2 of them on my podcasting account. Now, one is on a separate account, and I expect it to be separate. And then 2 were actually started by somebody else. So I went in there and put in some tickets. I was like, well, how do I get these podcasts onto my account? Their reply, delete them and resubmit them. But you're going to lose all of your iTunes reviews, and you're going to lose all your subscribers. I was like, really? That's your answer? So I got that answer. And then on the one that's on a different account, it doesn't show up when I bring up the Podcast Connect. And their answer was, oh, you have to do it on this separate website. I'm like, really? I thought this was supposed to be one website. And honestly, I've been too busy to try it. But this has been a disaster for me personally. It's probably working out great for some people. Although I will say one thing. I had an episode, actually it was episode 17 of Better Podcasting, which was not showing up in iTunes. We couldn't figure out why. Well, it was because when Steven posted it, yes, I'm going to call him out. It wasn't my fault. It was Steven's fault this time. When Steven posted it, he did not accurately rate the podcast. Now, Better Podcasting is rated as clean. And what he did is he put the not rated on it or whatever, and that made it not show up. So there's a little tip for everybody. If your podcast is clean, make sure every episode is labeled clean. Otherwise, it's not going to show up. But so I did that, and I changed it in Libsyn, and I went into iTunes. It wasn't changed yet. And I did what you're not supposed to do. I clicked the refresh feed in Podcast Connect, and then bingo, it was there. So it actually worked for one of the many things that I needed it to work.
In my defense, by the way, I had just finished watching 12:01 a.m. with SP, and so I had not clean podcasting on my brain. So that's my fault.
12:01? What is that?
It's your late night after hour show that you do.
Oh, shh, we weren't supposed to tell anybody about that.
Well, anyways, I am actually, in all seriousness, I am very thankful that you did find this, because it had me stumped. And I have had a similar thing with iTunes Connect. I've been trying to email about some podcasts from previous lives that I want to have under my iTunes Connect. And so far, having problems. I know this is the norm out there. So I'm guessing that this is something that if you're having that problem, send your ticket, see what happens. And if you don't get a response, hopefully enough people will have the problem and they'll fix it. So that's all we can do. It's a new thing. We can just hope and hope and hope some more. Right, Chris?
That's about all you can do right now. Like, I'm having issues too. It's only got one of my podcasts I've submitted from the same Apple ID showing up on there. So I'll have to fight with them. They'll tell me to remove it from iTunes, and I'll be like, no. And we'll just wait for Apple to... Oh, wait, Apple doesn't make changes. Never mind.
Well, if you had an experience with iTunes Connect, please do let us know. Go to betterpodcasting.com and tell us what your experience has been. So let's just go ahead and unlock that seat. Shall we do that?
Let's do it.
All righty. We'll do that in a moment. All right, so here's your opportunity. If you are watching live at geeks.live or on Blab or wherever, well, if you're on YouTube, you're going to have to hop over to Blab to end up calling in. But if you're on Blab, go ahead and call in and ask us a question. Otherwise, we will just go ahead and talk a little bit about what we've got to talk about until somebody chimes in here. So pop on in and we will absolutely answer your question.
Okay, so I've got a topic to talk about until somebody comes in, and that's RSS feeds. All right. Chris, do you know what an RSS feed is?
It's the tool I use to distribute my podcast.
Okay, fair enough. Steven, do you know what an RSS feed is?
I do, and I don't remember the proper what it breaks out to, but I do know what an RSS feed is.
What it's not called is real simple syndication, right? It is, as Stan Curious is pointing out in chat, rich site summary. And basically, it is what points people to your episode. So when you publish a new episode, whether you're on Libsyn, Podbean, Blueberry, wherever, PowerPress, wherever you're managing your feed, the new episode is loaded in there, and then your RSS catcher is picking it up. Now, I use iTunes. A lot of people use other podcast catchers or podcast apps, Overcast. We're hoping to get Google Play here soon for the masses and that sort of thing. Well, there has been a debate going on the last week or so within podcast circles. And really, it's not been a debate. It's been a lecture by Todd Cochran from Blueberry. And he has been adamant that one of his competitors, and I don't know who else is doing this besides Libsyn. Now, Libsyn uses many destinations. So they have a different destination that you can choose. You don't have to, but you can choose for Google Play or TuneIn or any of the places like Spotify that they have actually set up a destination for. And what that destination is another RSS feed for that specific site. So you put in that RSS feed in RSS feed in for Google Play or TuneIn or whatever, and it will pick up that as your RSS feed instead of the normal. Todd Cochran says that is ridiculous because you should just have one feed, and that one feed should be able to feed everything. And he's partially right, and he's mostly right. And the man, I'm not going to debate with the man. I mean, he knows what he's talking about. However, I pointed out that there is a use case for the hobby podcaster, and it's not being heard. So here's my use case, guys. Say you do an entertainment-based podcast. Say you're watching, I don't know, The Bachelor or Deadliest Catch or Starling Tribune on Arrow, Big Brother, or Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., whatever. Say you're doing any TV show. The best time to release that podcast is the next day. So you do a quick reaction podcast and then you release it the next day. Now, on our network, we do something a little bit differently. We add a lot of valued content. We actually produce our podcasts. We make them sound good, so we get them out a few days later. Well, what if you want to do both? And you want to release the actual live version like right afterwards, but you want to actually release in the same spot a produced podcast. Well, that can work. You can replace the file. However, if you are sending your podcast to Google Play, to Stitcher, to TuneIn, they actually, as soon as that episode comes out, as soon as you publish your podcast episode, they suck it up. And it goes into their system and it stays there forever. I've got a great example, and it's Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. podcast number 53. It was right before the holidays in 2014. I did not have time to edit that sucker. So what happened was I threw out a completely unedited, live, sounded crappy podcast. You had keyboard taps in there. You had long, drawn-out pauses. I did not edit it at all. And I thought, I'll get to it later. And then I'll edit it later and I'll throw it back in. Well, if you go to episode 53 of Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. and you pick that up on Stitcher, if it's still there, or any of the other places, you will be able to hear that awful podcast. Now, if I would have been able to shut off those destinations, shut off those distribution centers, And then when you're ready, you just turn on those destinations in Libsyn. I've heard that PowerPress has a similar function. So you could probably do that as well and have one feed for a produced podcast and one feed for a live podcast. And then you can just replace the file for the live podcast and then publish the one for the other podcast to the destinations, to the directories like Stitcher, TuneIn, and Google Play. So that's the use case for it. So it's not stupid for a hobby podcaster to want multiple destinations, but it is a specific use case. Most of the time, when you put that podcast out, it is probably, you don't want to mess with it again. So you double checked it, you triple checked it, and it's out there. But just pointing out, there is a use case. So I'm not calling Todd stupid at all. I would never do that. But I would say that there is a use case, and he runs Blueberry, and which contains PowerPress, and that does have a similar capability. So don't think that you can't use multiple feeds, basically.
So as a person that uses Podbean for my podcast providing, I would love to have a feature like that for some of my more time-sensitive podcasts so that I could put a live one out there temporarily and then push out the edited one later to all of those other sources, because sometimes I don't want what goes out there originally to be what's out there forever, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, because if you didn't catch an expletive deleted, it's not a clean podcast anymore. If you maybe said something like Jason Bryant, he runs a lot of wrestling podcasts, right? He had a coach call another coach the P word, and it's a naughty word. I'm not going.
A punk.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
and he had to try to edit that down so it didn't quite. It sounded like an audio blip. And he wouldn't have been able to do that. The podcast is out there on Stitcher, if he distributes it on Stitcher or whatever, and he wouldn't have been able to flip or change that. So that's just what I'm saying is it is a useful thing to be able to replace a file. But if you have, like on Stitcher, you can replace a file, but that's not a destination. That's its own director. I mean, that's its media hosting. But Google Play, once that gets going, your podcast, the first time that you put it out there, is going to be out there forever, unless they put some sort of replace file option in there, which doesn't exist in other places like TuneIn and Stitcher right now.
Yeah, and you know, I have to say, like I've talked about this before, I'm a self-hosting guy, right? So one of the things that I do use is the Blueberry service, and I pay the monthly fee for the advanced stats because I quite like it. I think that it's a good thing for my self-hosting. Now, putting everything aside, I think there are some really great points in these recent articles that have been coming out. And one thing that's kind of addressed about the RSS feeds is that while technically the Libsyn terms and conditions, you own your RSS, you can do your whatever you want with your slug. The reality is, if all of a sudden, for some reason, Libsyn.com went down tomorrow and was absolutely unrecoverable, I don't know what crazy thing happened, but it could, let's use our imagination. Anybody who is using the Libsyn.com slug or their slug on Libsyn.com as an RSS feed would lose that, as opposed to one of the points that's being made where if you own your own domain and you actually put your podcast through that, and that's the one you distribute, all you have to worry about is making sure that you've always got yourself yourdomain.com/whatever the RSS is. From there, you can do a variety of things, technically webmaster wise, to point it to wherever your current feed is. There's a variety of ways you can do it. I've done it. I've moved podcasts from services. I've moved podcasts even from domains or from subdomains over. And by having full control of my web hosting, I've been able to redirect it on the server side. So I lost nobody. So that's a big advantage of that. And that's one of the points that's being made. However, in my opinion, reading the article and whatnot, there's a lot of information coming out in these single articles. And I want to take this moment just to remind everybody that it doesn't matter who's saying it. It could be the owner of your favorite company. It could be just Joe Schmo. Always take everything with a grain of salt, because there is probably a reason that this article, or that there is an article out there capturing your interest, and use your judgment. Look at your situation. What situation am I in? What do I want from this? For example, the way that I do it, where I do use my domain's website for the RSS, the way that I have to do it is essentially I would have to double post if I was using Libsyn. I would have to go and post it to Libsyn, and I would have to go and post it to my domain. Same thing with any of the other services, Spreaker, with Podbean, all of these there. That's something that I am prepared to do. On the other hand, that might not be something you want to do. Maybe you only have yourself time, call back to time management, to end up posting in one place. So maybe that is the better alternative for you. Post somewhere where you do it once. So always take everything with a bit of a grain of salt, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, you got anything to say about this subject? Because I got another rant to go on.
I think you guys covered it pretty well. I'm going to defer to the wisdom that has been dished out already.
We're dishing out some wisdom, and I'm going to dish out some more. Okay. So we on this podcast would recommend media hosting. Either you can self-host if you know what you're doing and use PodPress or a simple PowerPress or one of the recommended plugins for your website, or you can use a media hosting site like Libsyn, Blueberry, Spreaker, or Podbean. Podbean's kind of, there are pluses and minuses to it. We're experimenting with it on a couple of podcasts on the network, and so far it's been okay. So far we can say, yeah, maybe it's something that we can consider, because in the past you couldn't, but now you kind of can. Okay. Well, another one that comes up quite frequently is Podomatic. Now, we've had several podcasts on the network start out on Podomatic and then try to get off of Podomatic. Gallifrey Public Radio is one, and they had all sorts of problems. I don't know, Jeannie, who runs Tyrion's Landing, I don't know if Tyrion's Landing started off on Podomatic, but she did have a podcast on Podomatic, and it was impossible for her to remove it. So she shut it down and started it somewhere else. So moving your podcast with Podomatic is problematic. But if you're happy with the service, why would you move, right? Okay, so reasons why people are not happy with the service. They limit your bandwidth. They place ads that aren't appropriate for your podcast in your or before your podcast and on your webpage, on the Podomatic webpage. And you have a storage limit. So my point is, we do not recommend Podomatic. If you are on Podomatic, we would like, and you are happy with them, I would like to hear what you have to say about that. But in the meantime, I do not recommend it. Stephen, would you recommend Podomatic?
No, for the same reasons that you did. Some issues with the migration, and that's the thing for me. I always come back to the migration possibility, and I think it's very important that people consider that, because you may be very, very happy with your service now, but what's going to happen, right? Like where could it go? They could change. They might not offer a feature you now need. So I think it's always important for you to consider the longevity of your podcast. And we've actually got some questions coming in here, not by Blab callers, but some that we can still talk about a little bit here from the chat. SP, you had one pulled up there a second ago.
I did. I wanted to change it. It was, which media services would you guys recommend? And I said it: Libsyn, Blueberry, Spreaker, and Podbean. But the other question is, and I'm having trouble bringing it up, is what about SoundCloud? Now, a lot of people swear by SoundCloud, and they have this built-in community around SoundCloud, and a lot of podcasts do great. Now, I tried it for my podcast. It didn't get a lot of listens. Maybe I'm just not SoundCloud material. But that's not necessarily why I wouldn't recommend it. Why I wouldn't recommend it right now is they've lost $77 million in 2 years.
That's a lot of money, guys. That's a lot of dough.
It's hard to recover from. And the word on the street is they might be flirting with, after this next loan that they got magically runs out, they might be flirting with not being able to operate anymore. This has happened to services in the past. And when it happens, it could happen overnight. You might get just a few weeks, and you're going to have to move all your files. So if you're on SoundCloud, I would recommend make sure you have backup copies of your files. Don't assume that they're going to be available. And then the second thing I would recommend is investigate a secondary media host in case that you want to move off of that, and make sure that you give yourself enough time so you can redirect your RSS feed, which we talked about before.
Yeah, solid advice, SP.
Yeah. And we have another question on the media front, which is probably related to what I was saying. And I'm glad that you asked this question, which is, isn't there just as much a chance of your own server blowing up as Libsyn's? Absolutely. That is totally true. That is something that is a possibility. But what I was referring to was that, like, betterpodcasting.com, SP and I own that domain. So we know that as long as we pay our bill and nothing weird happens with domain registrars, we have that domain. However, podbean.com, I do not own that. Libsyn.com, I do not own that. I would love to own it, but I don't. So we don't own those. So essentially, when we give out the Libsyn.com slug, the RSS feed on Libsyn.com, we are trusting them. Same thing with Podbean. We are trusting them. Same thing if we use the Blueberry service. Same thing with any of these hosting services. It would be the exact same thing as if I went and I got some subdomain on some random web host site. I would be trusting that web host. Now, with me, I back up the hosting. So if my web host did go down today, I could migrate it. I might get like a 24-hour sort of delay, but I could quickly sign up for an extra service. I have a laundry list of ones that I've used and have I know who I could register with like that and pour it over. So that is what I was getting at, is the .com I own, as opposed to trusting someone else's .com. But here's the thing, you want to just keep aware of the big players. We talked about it a minute ago with SoundCloud. They are one that you might want to consider a little bit about maybe finding some alternatives. Libsyn, on the other hand, Podbean, there's no warning signs at the moment.
And I will say, as a Podbean user, it has become, about 2 years ago, they're having many issues with the servers going down and download speeds being ridiculous. Then they switched over to Amazon Web Services, and things have been much smoother on that side. And it's cost effective for what I've been doing. But I also sort of protected myself, and it's kind of, people are going to be aghast a little bit. I use FeedBurner for one of those because I can control what FeedBurner points back to for the RSS feed on the back end. So that if for some reason something went crazy with Podbean, I could move that other podcast somewhere else real quick and then use their RSS feed to hook into FeedBurner again. It's not ideal, but it worked for what I was trying to figure out at the time.
So one final thing I will say is that we're talking about RSS feeds and places that you host your media. I will say, no matter where you host your media, if you have your own website, if you use a media hosting service or a combination thereof, make sure you own your domain. Like Stephen was saying, just the domain is $12-13 a year unless it's a premium domain. So just make sure you get it. Like, what's an example of a domain? www.betterpodcasting.com. We got that from a domain listing service. There is Hover, GoDaddy. I mean, I could list them all off, but it is a place where you go to buy a domain, and then you can point that wherever. You can point it to your own website. You can point it to a Facebook group. You can point it to your Libsyn page. Wherever you want the hub of your activity to point to, you can point it there.
Absolutely. And I'm not going to get all technical, but just know this. I was doing web work before I ever was doing podcasting. So I like to think that I've got some good history with playing with web hosts and tips and tricks with scripts and stuff like that. As long as you own your .com, doesn't matter the URL you've distributed, you will be able to manipulate that to where you want it to go. So yeah, own your domain. Great advice. We have another question coming in here, which is something we've talked about on previous episodes, but maybe you're new to the show. So absolutely, if you are, welcome to the show. We are being asked right now about, hi guys, can you talk about some of the recording technology you use? I'll start off myself. Me personally, we do this as a video show and also an audio show. So on the audio side of things, I use Cakewalk FA66. This is a multi-channel hardware interface. It is routed to a separate recording machine because I want to make sure I have the most, hopefully the most stable experience as possible. And then I have a couple other backup things worked in line, like a Zoom H1. I've got it split going over there. Then for the video side of things, I primarily record using the recording feature in the video program XSplit. That's where I get the video. And then I also use a backup recorder, which is the Hauppauge HD PVR Rocket. It's sort of, like I said, a backup video recording. So that essentially summarizes how I record. How about you, Chris?
So for me, I'm using an Audio-Technica AT2005 mic. I have it both set up to do, well, it does both USB and XLR. My primary setup is I run it in via XLR to my Mackie 802 VLZ4 mixer, and then from there I mix in via the other channels my co-hosts are on, a soundboard, things like that, and I'll record directly onto Audacity and onto a digital recorder that I keep here, which is just my Tascam DR05, which is what I record everything onto.
Yeah,
my setup's a lot simpler than Steven's.
Right. So we're all three hobby podcasters, and all three of us have hobby podcasting separate types of setup. So Steven uses a dedicated recording machine. Chris uses kind of my similar setup, but I'm a little bit more complex. You don't have to do this. Basically, all you really need is an ATR 2100, and you can use, it's got a dual USB and XLR setup, and you can use the USB to go into your computer, and you can use the XLR to go into a recorder with XLR inputs like the Zoom H5. So this is kind of my road gear that I'm holding up right now. I'm holding up the ATR 2100 and the Zoom H5. So you can use that as your main recording gear. Now, my actual home studio gear is a little bit more complex. I do multi-track. So I have a Zoom H6 that records multiple different channels, records me, it records the guests on another channel, and it records my soundboard on a third channel. And if I have to bring in other guests, I have up to 3 additional channels. So that's the recorder I use. I use a Mackie USB mixer. It's a Pro FX 16 V2. So that's there, and then I've got some compressors and digital processors in there. The microphone that I'm using is a Electro Voice RE320. I also have a Shure SM7B, and I'm trying to try them both out, see which one actually fits my voice better, and we'll see how that goes. Now, here's where it gets kind of complex, because I'm streaming on YouTube on my main computer, and I'm using a Logitech C920 to shoot out towards Steven on that. On Blab, I'm actually going out through an older Logitech webcam, a Pro 9000 webcam, and that's going into an older laptop, like an 8-year-old laptop. And that is doing a mix minus. So you're hearing me on that computer through a mix minus through my mixer. And you're only hearing me because I've just clamped it down to just me. So that's headed out there. And out of my Zoom H6, I have the line out going into another laptop, which is streaming on Spreaker. So yes, it's a little bit complicated, but it's how we're able to do all this.
Which, if you want to know more about it, I'm going to encourage you to check out episodes 7 through 10 of Better Podcasting. You can find those at betterpodcasting.com. SP and I break down our gear and our gear history. And then also, you might want to check out episodes 14 through 17, where we talk about video podcasting, because it's kind of covers some of the same things. So those are some previous episodes that we've done where we break it down in detail, because we know that there are people like gearheads and things like that that are just like us, and they want to know all about it. So we won't bore too much on that topic anymore.
Yeah, we won't do that.
Okay, so I want to talk briefly about a topic that we don't get to talk about a lot, which is your physical management of your podcast space. Now, SP, do you know why I want to talk about this right now?
Maybe because your wife is putting you in a closet?
That's true. I am in the closet, right over there. There's a closet right off camera there. But what it is actually, I have been hurting for podcast space for a while. If you can't tell, what it is if you ever seen me in any of the screenshots I put on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, or the ones that accompany the release each week, I am literally on my backdrop. Like, if I was to bump my elbow far back, I would bump my backdrop. So I'm on a little bit of a tight space. I also have hanging off of my desk all sorts of gear. My mixer is like 3/4 or a quarter of the way off. I've got no desk writing space at all. So what I've set out to do is upgrade my Podrena. And that is something that I actually have in my garage, because I'm a hobby podcaster. In my garage, I have a brand new desk that I'm going to be setting up. So Why am I talking about this? Well, it's not because I want to tell you that I bought something new, because quite frankly, I have nothing to brag about. It's nothing that special, but it's going to allow me to get more space. What I want to do is talk about what I've got going on right now, which is that I work on a cycle of doing 2 podcasts a week, one recorded Mondays, one recorded Fridays. How do I fit in the desk move? I have all of this gear here, and that's something that I'm going to have to disconnect it and reconnect it. And if you've ever done any rewiring, whether it's your TV or your audio system, whatever it is, you know that it can be quite the pain. So how am I going to do that, right?
That's interesting to me because I did the same exact thing in the fall of 2014, and I do not envy you one single bit. It took me down for 2 months, really.
Yeah, so what I'm going to be doing is, what you don't know is that previously to building the backdrop I have behind me, I had a DVD case full of random DVDs and other things like that. So I'm doing it in stages. Essentially, I moved that last night, and I'm trying to build around to the point that I actually have to replace the desk. Now, why do I really want to share this? Because it's something that I don't think a lot of people consider. I think a lot of times people get their desk in an arrangement that they maybe forget a little bit about what it takes to disconnect something and reconnect something. And that's the problem that I've got going on right now. And it is going to be a pain. And the other thing is, I have been realistic with myself. I've come to grips with the fact that SP and I, we talked about it at the top of the show. We are pre-recording next week's Better Podcasting episode. I've come to grips that may or may not have my pretty backdrop behind it. If it does, cool. If it doesn't, oh well. And it bugs me. I really like having the backdrop, but I have made that conscious decision that I might not even be using this mic. I might simply use my Audio-Technica AT2005 or my Audio-Technica ATR2100. It just depends on where I get. And once again, hobby podcaster, so I have realized that I have to make some sacrifices because I have a day job to get to, and that's what I'm going to do. And I just wanted to share that experience that I've got, and then we'll reflect on it once I'm done. Maybe it will have gone well. Maybe 4 weeks from now, I'll be returning the desk to Costco. I don't know.
So I may or may not be in my garage podcasting in solidarity with Steven next week. We'll see. I might break out the mobile gear, and we might do it that way. So mobile from home, but I don't know if I can give up this microphone. I really like to use it. So we'll see what that happens. But look, the big desk move, it disrupts your whole house because these desks are huge. I actually, right to my right is my great room. And I have pictures that both these two gentlemen have seen of the great room full of this desk material. My desk was actually, I was laying on my desk. It's that big, and it weighs like as much as a tank. It took 6 people to get it into the house. It just disrupts your entire life. So if you're making a big move like that, you have to plan it out. So you got to be a project manager. So you're a podcaster, right? And you're a producer or a co-host or whatever. You're used to schedules. Make yourself out a schedule. Try to keep to it. And if not, have that fallback plan. That's just my 2 cents. Chris, what do you think? You've redone your desk down in the basement, haven't you?
I did, but when I did that, I had a USB mic with minimal cables that I had to do. So for my purposes, it was take everything off of one desk, install it on the other desk, and then I'm good in about a half hour. I didn't have to rerun a bunch of cables. If I had to do that now, I would have to move a desktop computer. I'd have to move 2 laptops. I'd have to move all of my lighting. I'd have to move my mixer and my mics and my swing arms, and it would take forever. And I would be going, you know what? I don't need a new desk that bad right now. I just hold off. I'm like, when I move, then I'll deal with it because I'm doing it all in one fell swoop.
That's funny. That's funny.
So we got a question, guys, from Dan Harrison King, and he says, I'm a musician and I currently have 108 subs. So I assume that's subscriptions and not submarines or another adult term on YouTube. Any ideas about how I can promote myself on the internet so people can see my work? Well, what do you think, guys? I mean, I think a website maybe to get some SEO, to do articles. I think Facebook and Twitter are obvious. Have you guys started Snapchat yet?
What is this Snapchat all these youngins are doing? No, in all seriousness, I haven't started doing Snapchat, but...
Okay, so I bring this up for a reason. Elsie on the Feed podcast, which is Libsyn's official podcast, said she started using Snapchat because a few other podcasters had used Snapchat. And guess what, guys? I created a Snapchat account. It's Stargate Pioneer, if you're looking for it. And I have been making short little videos throughout the day, just promoting the network and everything. Has it been successful? Probably not so far, but we'll see where it leads. And it's easy. You just take a 10-second video and then you move on with your life. So I think that's great. And also another one that a co-host of ours on GonnaGeek absolutely loves is Instagram. So that is also a way that you can do it. Now you can make a photo, a JPEG or whatever, promoting your show. You can take pictures of you doing your podcast or whatever, and in the caption, give off the latest information on your latest episode. But those just all great ideas, which you can do. And you're visual anyway. You're on YouTube, so I assume you're visual. So you can, Snapchat would probably be great. Just take a little Snapchat while you're actually recording. Or if you're out in the field, you can do that too. So just some easy recommendations for you to gain followers. Although I will say that with all these social media networks, if you want to try a few of them, go ahead and do that. But if you find one or two or three that work best for you, stick to those three. Don't venture off and do everything. You're not going to have time for it.
Absolutely. And the other thing that you want to do is remember the social part of social media, because interaction is huge. I've built a couple podcasts from the ground, some websites from the ground, and when you start to make those connections and you get your circle of people, that helps you tremendously, because if you find somebody that really likes you, they might know somebody who would also be interested, and they'll tell. And in such a very busy market, whether it's podcasting or YouTubing, whatever it is, anything that you can do to get yourself out there and get people talking about you is good. Well, maybe not anything, but you know what I mean. So interact with people, talk with people. Maybe you find a fan that is really into your stuff. Talk with them, include them, because that's huge, because the more they feel included, the more likely they are to promote your stuff. And we actually have another question coming in here as well, which is, can you guys recommend a great shock mount for an Audio-Technica 2020? Now, the 2020 is a condenser microphone. I think it's about the $150, $200 range. Is that right? Or is it the higher one?
It's $100 here in the States.
Okay.
I don't know what it is up in Canada. And the official Audio-Technica shock mount for it is about $75, and it's called the AT8458. But I don't know if you're looking for maybe a secondary market one that's cheaper. I will say that these shock mounts that Audio-Technica make are great. I've used one with my Sennheiser E935. It's the Audio-Technica AT, I believe it's 8410A. It was a great shock mount. So I just don't use it because it doesn't fit the microphone I have now.
Yeah, and here's the other thing that I'll talk about as well is I've done a lot of Googling on shock mounts, and if you are looking for something discounted, I would recommend checking out Amazon and eBay, because while they may not give you the same level of quality, I know a lot of those Audio-Technica condensers do fit the usual mold as far as diameter goes. So you'll probably find there's a bunch of options available. And if you look them up, they'll actually say the specific diameter of the microphone that it will take. And then what you can do is, if you don't know the diameter, just Google the specs and it'll come up. The only thing that you want to do is make sure you Google the specs first, because I'll tell you, the microphone that I use, the Audio-Technica BP40 dynamic microphone, it is unusually large. So I ran into some problems finding an aftermarket one. Long story short, I actually had one I was able to make work. But if you're looking for a third-party shock mount, take a look and Google the specs.
I was going to say, I'm glad you guys mentioned third-party shock mounts, because I ran into this issue a while ago. When I was still podcasting using a Blue Yeti, I had my swing arm, and I wanted to mount it on a shock mount. So I don't know if you guys are familiar. Blue has their first party shock mount made for it called the Ringer. It looks really cool, but it's friggin' ginormous. And to have it on there, I had to have it hung up like this. And the problem was, if you're watching a video, you can really tell, this elbow joint right here, there was no way to crank it tight enough that I wouldn't be sitting there talking and my mic just started drooping the entire time. So it was like $60 down the crapper. Now, supposedly Blue has since redone the Ringer and turned it into something better. So I was really frustrated by it, and I went to Amazon and I found this group that made third-party ones that fit perfectly for my Yeti. And this $25 shock mount I have here worked better than anything Blue had made, transmitted basically no sound through it, and lined up all of the holes perfectly. So you can find good stuff on Amazon. Just because it's cheap doesn't necessarily mean it's cheaply made. Read some of the reviews on some of these things especially.
Great point, Chris.
Right. So I know that there are some third-party market shock mounts for the Audio-Technica ATR 2100, which would also fit the AT2005, by the way, Audio-Technica AT2005. And the Samson Q2U also is kind of the same microphone as well. This is a wider body than a normal vocal microphone. So it needs the Audio-Technica AT8410A shock mount will not fit this. It's too small of a diameter to fit this. So there is the OnStage or MyStage, OnStage MY420 shock mount, which would work for this. And then there's go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, if you're watching a video, it's what I'm using right now to hold my AT2005.
So there's that. And then there's the MY325, which is the smaller cousin, and it works great. I actually have it for my mobile gear, so that works great as well. However, there are third-party shock mounts that are smaller barrel looking, and do they work perfect? No, but they are something. So if you're looking to shock mount your ATR 2100 or your AT 2005, there are lower price options than the MY420, but the one that Chris is using, the MY420, is probably the best you're going to get for that class of microphone.
For sure. And I'll say the OnStage stands company makes some good reasonably priced gear, whether it is a stand or whatever, for the hobby podcaster. You know, I'll be honest, if you read the reviews on some of these arms and things like that, if you're putting a lot of use into them, a lot of times you get what you pay for. However, for the hobby podcaster, definitely a consideration for yourself, no matter what it is. If it is a mic arm, if it is a shock mount, whatever, look at all your options, right?
Yep. So I have something to talk about. You guys ready for another rant?
Let's do it.
No, I'm not.
Okay. Well, I'm not really going to rant, but I am going to say that Blab is always changing. Always changing. And a lot of people, actually, serious podcasters, have pulled back from Blab. They're like, look, it's too unstable a platform. Let's take a look at Blab. It's in beta. It's free. So I'm not going to complain too much about it. However, the audio sound that comes from Blab lately, the recorded audio, has not been great. And there have been occasions of Blab just completely shutting down. And some of the reasons for this is that they are actually working the back end of Blab, actively working it. And if you take a look at how you get into a Blab, from this week to last week, it's actually changed. So if you continue to use Blab for your podcasting platform, like Chris and I do with Starling Tribune, like I do on Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D., like Chris does with his special edition Nerd Alert News, just be careful to record your audio outside of Blab. So on a external digital recorder or whatever, and then B, just be prepared that you might need a few extra minutes to get in to figure out how to work your Blab, because it might have changed like it did this week.
For sure. And I have to say, like, Blab, considering how new it is, I am super impressed. I know I don't use it myself for any of the podcasts that I do, but that's because I do video podcasts where I'm prioritizing, for the video companion, I'm prioritizing the end result. Now, it is amazing how easy it makes it for somebody to call in. I know people who have proper podcast setups sometimes have issues and they have to refresh and things like that. But where else can you be watching the video and click join, and you're in like that. It is an amazing piece of technology. The other thing that is super amazing is that it's sending 3, 4, whatever, how many people are on there, different streams at one time. So if I'm watching this Blab right now that we're recording, what you should probably be doing is muting me because I'm annoying. So then you only have to hear SP and Chris. That's an amazing piece of technology. And it's mind-blowing to think about the technical back end they must have to have for this. So I give them a huge pass. They're in beta. You know what? Yeah, audio sucks sometimes, but it is what it is. And if you're just using it as a place to interact with people, or maybe a place just to record your podcast, and then you do what SP does, which is everybody records their own tracks and put them again together at the end. Who cares? It is a great service. Yeah, it could absolutely use some enhancements, but it's beta. I think we're going to see that with time. It's going to improve drastically. And at the moment, I just have to tell people, like, if you're looking to do something live, look at Hangouts on Air, and look at Blab, because they both have their pros and their cons. And Blab is new, and it is a contender for YouTube or for Hangouts on Air, which has been a product of Google, for crap's sakes.
Right. So, guys, we have a question. I want to address this.
Okay.
It's from @StanCurious, Frances McGrogan, and she is asking, any suggestions for finding/encouraging guests to come on a hobby podcast? It's a very broad question. Now, I'm going to niche it down because I actually have some inside information. I know kind of where she's going. So
you cheater, cheater.
I am totally I broke into the professor's office and went into the test safe, and I took out the test and I read the answers. That's exactly what's going on. Actually, I saw her post this somewhere else, and I realized what she's trying to do. So she is trying to promote different things that you can do with life, like hobbies and that sort of thing. And at one point in time, she had approached us and said that she was looking for retired people or people with time on their hands. You know, what can they do with all their great time? So I will recommend that if you have a senior center around, maybe get with the senior center to have a day where people come and tell their stories. Go to libraries and just see what people are reading on, and ask them questions and see if they want to talk about it, because a lot of people like to read up and research on their hobbies. I would also just go to just experience different things on yourself, like go to a cooking class, go to a ice rink, because I also know she lives in Canada. So, you know, go to the lake and see a bass fishing tournament or something like that. So go to some of these places and just do live interviews, as well as go to places where people actually congregate and just sit down and ask them questions. Say, hey, look, can you record a little segment? And get yourself... I know she's got a lot of gear, but get yourself a portable digital recorder. I don't know if you have one or not, and I would take that with you. And get yourself, I know you have some great mics, but get some great Rode mics, some interview mics, and I can make some recommendations. I'm looking at the Sennheiser MD46 right now, which is a reporter's microphone. You don't have to get that microphone. You can use the ATR 2100 if you happen to have one, or I believe she has some Shure SM58. So those are great microphones to take with you as well.
Absolutely. Chris, you got anything to chime into that?
It's really tough to follow up with these things. You guys are too thorough.
Okay, so I got one here then. We've got a comment on Blab, and I'll let you do the honors of that, okay? Go ahead and read that out, Chris.
So we have a comment that Steven looks like Gerard Butler's younger kid brother.
Best compliment I've ever received.
Steven, can we get you to scream, "This is better podcasting," and kick someone down a shaft?
No, I don't think I can. I don't think I can.
I was really hoping for it.
I can't believe that.
He's going to be insufferable now. You guys realize that. He's going to be completely insufferable. Between Steven and JS's compliment that he looks like, what's his name, on GonnaGeek the other day? Yeah, that was... He looks like Ben Affleck. From a certain angle, he looks like Ben Affleck.
But we do have actually another question as well, which comes from Steve Dotto Tech. Has Blab... By the way, I know Steve Dotto, so that's awesome. Has Blab not bought a high-end audio service that should improve audio significantly soon? You know a little bit about that acquisition, don't you, SP?
Yeah, I do. Blab bought PodClear, which was a company that was starting to market to podcasters so that they could actually pay to have podcasts being recorded through multi-track, a lot like Zencaster is today. So they actually bought them up, but they didn't necessarily buy them for the audio technology. They bought them as an acquisition for the developing crew. So they actually bought expertise. They bought 3 or 4 highly trained individuals that knew how to code, that knew this space and everything, and they needed to bring them on board. They did bring some audio expertise with them. So I would hope that eventually they will fix a lot of the audio issues that are going on right now. And make no mistake about it, Blab is working on things. It's just not like as fast as we would want. And if you've ever been in software development, it takes a long time to get where you want to go from where you're at. And there's always requirements creeps too. Once they put this out and podcasters started to use it, we're like, oh, can you do this? Can you do this? We want 16:9. We want to be able to show video. We want to be able to do this. We want to be able to do that. And they're like, yeah, we'll get right on that. And then they have a list of everything that they need to do.
I do want to go ahead and thank Steve Dotto for the question. That was awesome. And yeah, if you're a Canadian personality, you know who he is. But I suppose that is going to take us towards the end of Better Podcasting 19. We have reached that approximate hour timeline, and we do want to know what you thought of tonight's format. Okay, sure, we didn't get as many call-ins as we wanted, but we've only been promoting it a couple of weeks, and that is something that if you do like this format, if you like this question answer sort of thing, please do let us know, because maybe that is something that we could do a little bit more of. Or maybe you just want to be like, hey, we want Chris on here all the time.
Nobody wants that.
Yeah, we do. I get to see you in a week, buddy. C2E2, that's Chicago Comic and Entertainment Expo on Friday, the 18th of March, 2:45 p.m. in room S503. Chris and I, with 4 of our other GonnaGeek hosts, will be hosting a panel. We'll be talking about your everyday podcasting for your everyday life. And I do have confirmation. We will be able to give you something to help in your podcasting.
Tease, tease, that is a tease, isn't it? Isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty, so that is taking us to the last moments of episode 19. As I mentioned, we want to know what you have to say, so go to betterpodcasting.com, and we will return next week with our usual format. SP, do you want to tease that?
Yes, we'll be talking about how much money it's going to cost to start your podcast. So if you're curious about how much you're going to have to pay to start a good sounding podcast, you tune in to episode 20.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Better Podcasting. We want to hear from you. You can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. If you like the show, please consider giving us a 5-star review in iTunes. Thanks for listening, and we will see you again next week.